when I left home, I still had this strong idea of what marriage should be like, and I had a goal that I could try and aim towards in terms of having being married. I wanted to be married as soon as I could. I wanted to be married when I was 16, 17, 18. And I had a few problem relationships along the way.
I spent a lot of my life carrying a perception that when it comes to conflict in a relationship, that if the two people that you love fight, someone's going to leave.
Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate, a dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Kadkodian. And this is their podcast, Couples Synergy.
Welcome back to another episode of Couples Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean. I'm Dr. Ray.
And I'm Jean. And this is our podcast about love, marriage, and relationships.
Be sure to check us out online on our Facebook page and Instagram at Couples Synergy, or our website, couplesynergy.com. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast or send us any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear more about. And now on to Couples Synergy, an in-depth look at love, marriage, and relationships, where we bring you our experience helping thousands of couples transform their relationships for nearly 20 years.
You know, every day we get to hear intimate details about a couple's celebrations, disappointments, and everyday challenges. We've often wished these stories were shared because we know we are more similar than different. So we've created not only an avenue where you can hear about people's intimate lives, but an atmosphere where people come over to our home pub, pour a drink, and share their stories.
People like today's guests, Julie and Ari, welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for being guests on the show.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Hey.
You guys are coming to us remote from the land down under.
You got it. Yeah. If we could show you a kangaroo in the backyard, we would, but there aren't any right now.
What time is it? It's 5 o'clock here.
PM.
That would
it's just coming up 10 past 8 a.m. on Sunday.
Okay.
So the pub's open by now.
We're in the past.
Right. We are in the past. A glimpse into the future.
Yeah.
There you go.
So, we're going to definitely get into your story, but before we do, why don't you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves? How old are you? What do you do for a living? And how long have you been together?
I'll kick off. So my name's Julie, of course, and I work full-time as a public servant in Australia in our Defence Department. I've been in that department for a good 18 years now. I thank my husband for that. As an ex-ADF Defence Force member, I was able to follow him around with his work, of course, but through that managed to stay as a public servant in every location we go to. So that's given me a really interesting and diverse career. In terms of us as a family, we've been married for coming up to 29 years in November this year. And we have 3 adult children, twin girls. They turned 21 this July. And our son is 22.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ari. I'm 55. I currently work as in the field of cybersecurity for the Australian Human Services Agency. I've been there for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was working for Defence in the Army. I was there for 13 years. And we have 3 children, twin girls. They're 21 this year, and a boy, he's 22. He's just got his license, so we don't see a lot of him at the moment. He's either in transit between here and his girlfriend's place or at his girlfriend's place. He does come home for dinner, though. So
yeah, it's always fun when they get a girlfriend. Can you guys tell us the story of how you met?
I'll kick off. I think you've written a little bit about it.
A little bit. You go ahead. Tell your version of the story.
All right. So there was this conference that was being arranged by a local church, and I had a mate come over, and he kept inviting me to this conference, and I really didn't want to go, but he kept on reminding me, and then he ended up saying, "Look, I bought you a ticket," and so I just felt obliged to go along at that stage. So I went to the conference, and I sat as far as to the back as I possibly could. So I was at the back row, sitting there. And throughout the conference, which lasted a weekend, the speaker would, from time to time, interact with the audience and tell a joke. And I kept hearing this amazing laugh that came from the front somewhere, like right at the front. And because I was right at the back, I couldn't see who it was. But this was just this amazing, really loud, unique, but beautiful sounding laughter coming from the front. And my approach to relationships was I really wasn't interested in developing a relationship with a girl. And this laughter was obviously coming from a girl. So I just sat at the back and tried to appear as uninterested as possible. It was very hard because this laughter had prompted my attention. Every time I heard this laugh, I just needed to see who it was. And so it was a little bit frustrating. Anyway, the final day of the conference, I was sitting at the back, and it was literally right at the end of the conference. Everyone was starting to part and say goodbye. And this old man was walking down the back row, shaking everybody's hand along the back row and wishing them farewell. He came closer to me. He was working his way down. He was coming closer to me. I thought, he's going to shake my hand. I thought, okay, right I go. So he came towards me. He got right in front of me. He reached out his big hand, and so I went to shake his hand. So I grabbed his hand, and then as I grabbed his hand, he just like turned around and said, "And I'd like to introduce you to," and there was Julie standing right behind him. And it was like, wow, this was the girl that I caught the back hair of, the side of her face. From the back of the conference hall, I could see glimpses of her from time to time. But again, as I didn't want to show that I was in her, I didn't want to show that I'd actually noticed her.
Yeah.
It was just one of those moments where when I finally saw her face to face, it was just amazing. And from that moment off, we ended up sharing our details, sharing our interests, and meeting up again. And not long after that, we were engaged and married. I mean, I think it was within a very short time that I decided that this is the girl that I wanted to marry.
What was that first meeting like for you, Julie?
I'd actually noticed Ari earlier in the weekend when I went into the kitchen to get something, and I saw a man standing at the sink, and I had the denim jeans and the white shirt and the dark hair and the broad shoulders, and I caught the silhouette sort of thing, and very, very vividly, as you can tell, noticed him. Subsequently became immediately speechless and turned around and walked out. And so that was that moment. And then, as Ari just described, the introduction through a friend of mine that brought me to that conference. And of course, I realised, hey, this is the guy that I saw before. That's really cool. And we both were involved in youth ministry at the time, so we had a very justifiable reason to exchange phone numbers. So I was definitely keen, but what I didn't know was happening in the background behind the scenes was the place that Ari was coming from, where he wasn't looking for a relationship or anything like that. And yet he went home that day and, as he tells the story, informed his dad that he just met the woman he was going to marry. But to seal the deal, he just had a little conversation with God about it and said, if she's the one for me, I want her to ring me by 5 o'clock tomorrow. And I rang at 1 minute to 5 the next day.
Wow.
Mind you, when I did tell my dad that I just met the girl I was going to marry, I mean, he did have a bit of a chuckle on his face.
So he didn't think you were being serious, or he thought it was fantastical, or
maybe he was being more cynical than, I don't know. But when I said, Dad, I've just met the girl I'm going to marry, I can still remember the smile or the grin on his face right now. I'm not sure if it was cynical. I'm not sure if it was like that good for you type of a grin. But yeah, I'll never forget it. It's just one of those moments. I should phone him up and ask him.
And you both knew really quick.
Yeah.
Well, we both knew, but so our meeting and then getting serious about our relationship happened very, very fast. So we were engaged 2 months later after we met. But from the time that we met on that weekend, during the course of the following week, we met up 3 times. And the following weekend, so this is just 1 week time frame, he said to me, we went to a concert with a group of people, and he said, look, whenever I meet a girl, I'm not interested in building a relationship. And then he said, until I met you.
Apart from friendship.
Apart from friendship, yeah. And then he said, until I met you, which was, but he said following that, I'm looking long term here. So I knew 100% that he'd drawn that line in the sand. This wasn't just a casual thing. He was looking for a life partner, and so was I. And so we knew right at the start we were looking long term.
And what was it about the other person that you fell in love with?
For me, lots of things, but Ari's nature, what attracted me to him was his incredible compassion and his heart and the way that he interacted with people. He had if I could put it in a word, such a tenderness about the way he engaged with people. He was very caring, very considerate, very thoughtful. I was also, of course, very attracted to his passion for God, because that was a place, and still is, a place that I was in at that time too. So our shared faith was and is an integral part of who we are when we met. And he was bloody good looking as well. So, it was a win-wins as far as I was concerned.
I was just impressed by how honest and sincere and real Julie was. She had this humble, open book personality. When I spoke with her, it was like I was speaking with the real person. The person I was seeing was beautiful, and she's always reminded me of a very earthy woman, almost like a Calamity Jane, like a Calamity Jane type of, I am what I am, and the I am that I saw, the person that I saw was I could live with for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And when I saw that.
Why at that time were you not interested in relationships, Ari?
Yeah, I just experienced quite a few difficult, serious relationships. And I suppose I've lost trust in the whole idea and concept that you could have a successful long-term relationship.
And how long were you guys married before you had children?
7 years. Married 7 years before our first child came along.
Was that intentional?
It was. Well, yes and no. So we got to the 5-year mark, and from that point we started to try to have children. But God's timing was just phenomenal, always is phenomenal, because at that time we had just started attending Bible college, and so which was a 3-year commitment. And as it happened, I fell pregnant in our last year of study. So when we finally graduated, I was very soon after that ready to give birth to our son. So it was all really good timing. That we really enjoyed that period of time just to enjoy each other and get a sense of the direction, what we wanted to do and things like that. We just had a lot of fun. And we still had fun after our children came along, but yeah.
It was like a 7-year honeymoon.
How is the roles where you guys live? Like in here, my mom and Ray's mom, they were stay-at-home moms and the dads worked. And now today it's kind of all over the place of how people set their lives up.
That's a really good question, I think. I left home when I was about 15. My parents divorced. And so, when I was 15, my dad invited me to leave home. A lot of it was due to my behaviour. So I ended up leaving home. But I still had a very strong sense of what family should be based on the way my parents raised me. So even though my parents divorced, I still believed in the concept of marriage, long-term commitment, the values that underpinned that within society at the time. Both my parents worked. They were always seemed to be in financial duress. So there wasn't a lot of time for myself and my brothers because they were always focused on their jobs. Of course, there was some personal issues between my parents as well. But again, when I left home, I still had this strong idea of what marriage should be like, and I had a goal that I could try and aim towards in terms of having being married. I wanted to be married as soon as I could. I wanted to be married when I was 16, 17, 18. And I had a few issues. I had a few problem relationships along the way.
And for me, in terms of roles and how those roles inform relationships in my growing up, I too, like Ari, had a broken home. So I was basically raised from the age of 10 by my father. My mother I was raised in New Zealand. My mother came to Australia to live. So for me, that left quite a mark around. And like Ari, my father ran a farm, and so he was working all the time, early in the morning, late in the day, that kind of thing. Then when I came to Australia to live with my mother for a while, similar scenario there. She was working a lot. But at the point in my life, I was 16 years of age, so becoming increasingly independent myself. I can say that in terms of how those roles created a type of belief system in me at that young age, I spent a lot of my life carrying a perception that when it comes to conflict in a relationship, that if the two people that you love fight, someone's going to leave. So at 10 years of age, I created that belief in me and carried that through well into my marriage. And it was through I carried a fear of conflict in case it went really bad, in case my husband decided to leave. There's all this stuff going on in my head. And it was through Ari's patience with me and reinforcing and proving that wouldn't happen that I learned how to find my voice in our relationship too. So it was interesting reflecting back and unpacking that and understanding where it came from.
So both of you, it was not role modeled how to have a healthy relationship. You guys had to figure that out together and on your own.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Did you do anything intentional to learn how to do that? Did you read books or go to counseling or have any type of support or guidance?
I think the church environment provided a degree of relationship counseling, as well as role models and positive reinforcement. So that was a very good start for us. Those things didn't really deal with more of the deeper personality problems that at least we've experienced anyway, that you discover or develop due to the circumstances in life. I found that my time in the military left me with some very difficult thought processes that I needed to work through, that I'm still trying to sort out, but I'm mostly resolved from what I can see. And I think I'm learning that there's just, even though you know that you don't stop learning, you just don't stop learning about these things. Yeah. And there's always this hope of reaching a point where you're comfortable. And it's like learning a point where you're comfortable in your relationship and the world around you. And then you see something else that you're not comfortable with. And so you want to iron that wrinkle out as well.
And for me, I, in terms of, role modeling and support and things like that, there have been a couple of times when I have sought a counsellor, and it wasn't so much that there was like a particular crisis or things like that, but I didn't feel comfortable talking about deeply personal things in our marriage with a friend. I felt that, with a counsellor, I can just totally talk through whatever I need to talk through. And I was really proud of myself for doing that, because I just debunked the whole myth of, you only go to a counsellor if something's really, really, really bad. And again, it just helped to bounce my thought processes and how I'm thinking things through and stuff like that. So it's been a constructive time. And over the 29 years, I've maybe done that 3, possibly 4 times. But for me personally, I'm a voracious learner, so personal development, all that sort of thing. And so I find that if I'm struggling with a particular issue, I'll jump into YouTube and find some, like a TED Talk or something like that, think it through, and we'll have a conversation. And I also have found that the Word of God for me, when things have been particularly difficult, that relationship with my Creator has really brought amazing insight, right in those moments when it just cuts through all the noise of what's going on in your head and gets into your heart. And so those have been the places where I've gone to God and asked for help, and He's just delivered every single time. And that's been a huge part of my learning and growing as well.
What was it like to add 3 children in a very short period of time to your family?
Surprising.
I think that having children has been the most challenging experience of my existence, I think. It was such a beautiful place to be as a man, being married with 3 gorgeous kids, like healthy, happy, didn't want for anything, and had no worries about them at all. And they were just happy kids. They niggled now and again, but they were just happy kids. And it was just such a wonderful experience. I knew I was one of the luckiest people on earth to have that. But things change, life changes, and they grow up and they go through their struggles. And I never wanted them to leave. I never wanted them to grow up. And that was I just never wanted it to happen. If they could have stayed under the age of 10 or 12 for the rest of their life, I would have been in paradise. But they grow up and they have friends who I don't necessarily like, or they start spending more and more time away from home, or playing computers or things like that. And it's that part where you have to let go of them.
It's that transition.
I saw my whole identity as being their dad, and now they weren't really relying on me or needing me as much as they needed to, which was something that, I had to address or accept.
Yeah.
And so I became something else now. I became, whether it was just, hey, Dad, can I have this? Or Dad, can you do that? Or, being the lawnmower, or the taxi driver, or the home repairman, or the whatever it was. It was no longer that coming to me for cuddles. It was coming to me always
needing something. It's just the transition as they grew, and the reshaping of the relationship. But I have to tell you the story of when we found out we were expecting the twins, because after our son came along, who ended up being an emergency delivery, so it was a little bit traumatic. But because it took us so long to fall pregnant with him, we assumed it would take a long time to fall pregnant the second time. So that didn't happen. We were wrong. And so he was born April, and that November I fell pregnant with the twins. And I'll never forget telling Ari that news after my first checkup. So like it was yesterday, I was in the laundry putting washing on, as you do, a lot. And he came in and we started chatting, and I said, so you know how we've been talking about maybe getting a bigger car? And he's going, yeah. And he's just leaning against the wall. I said, we're going to have to get a bigger car. And he said, why is that? And I said, because we're having twins. And he literally raised his hands to his face like this and just went, no. And he slid down the wall till he was down on the floor with his face in his hands. And for a moment I panicked and thought he was, really upset and disappointed, but he was just overwhelmed emotionally and filled with, ecstatic joy and terror simultaneously. So, it was fun.
What were some of the challenges that you had having a single and then twins?
Do you know what? I think the biggest challenge was coming to terms with the reality of what that meant for us, and really quickly adjusting and adapting to that. Through the pregnancy with the twins, the medical professionals kept telling me, this is a high-risk pregnancy, all these different things could go wrong, and just that messaging all the time was really creating in me a lot of anxiety. And I just reached a point where I just turned that off. In that, I said to myself, look, I'm just going to take things one day at a time. And that very much came my mantra, even down to I'm just going to focus on the next hour because, stuff everywhere and all that sort of thing, and figuring it out on the fly. It was challenging, but looking back, we were so blessed that, our kids were healthy and we had literally an army of support behind us. And I think the best thing that I did, to be honest, was two things. Number one, to just eliminate the noise of what might go wrong and just decide I'm going to do it one day at a time. That gave me a lot of peace and able to focus where I needed to focus. And saying yes to help. When people say, can we help? Say yes. You don't get a medal for, trying to do it all yourself. So people would show up, I'd point to the vacuum cleaner and all the things that need to be done, hand the kids over, that kind of thing.
So for me, the biggest challenge was much more practical. Like now, I was involved with youth counselling and youth ministries, and it's something that a lot of it was voluntary and it didn't put food on the table. And now I was going to be responsible for 3 young lives, and I needed to start to think a little bit more practical. So my thoughts were, how do I provide now for an increased group of people? How do I provide for their futures? And that's where my headspace was.
So, for the two of you, an intact family was not really role modeled. And, being there for your kids, that was also something that was not role modeled as well. And what we know about couples who, start to have kids, especially, a lot of kids within a small amount of time, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of pressure, right? And conflict usually rises. And so how did you guys learn how to deal with conflict and arguing together?
Well, it was a partnership.
Yeah.
I think one of the first arguments that we ever had resulted in some door slamming.
Yeah.
So, and I think I took the lead one day, and I just basically made it very clear that I wasn't going to be interested in door slamming for the rest of my life.
Something like he said, I will not have that kind of behaviour in my house. Something like that. He really just set that boundary very clearly. And he said it in a way that was firm and with a tone that made me go, oh, okay.
But at the same time, I did say, look, I wanted to live in a house of peace. I wanted my house to always try and lean towards peace rather than antagonism or bitterness or carrying hurt. So, and that is, I think that was something that stayed with us from the start all the way through, even the most worst arguments. I think a worst argument for us is how long people don't talk to each other.
Yeah.
So the peace is sort of like, it's not really peace if you're having an argument with someone.
And not talking.
But if you're not talking with someone, well then that's a peaceable way of going about it as opposed to shouting and throwing things or whatever.
And I think also too, we literally did our best to set some boundaries in how we do fight and argue, so to speak, in terms of we both grew up in an atmosphere of, conflict and raised voices and things like that, and we didn't want that for our kids. And so we worked really hard to use our words to communicate versus just shooting off at the mouth, so to speak, and regretting it afterwards. And, because we both have memories still very clear of what that environment causes a child to feel. And we didn't want to put that onto our children. And, hey, we're not perfect. We weren't always able to succeed that. But a high percentage of the time we worked on conversations. When things got really intense, we had those hard conversations away from the kids. And, yes, sometimes it went over 2 or 3 days, but we persevered and we expressed what we needed to express and sorted it out. And that's the model we've tried to follow.
I would rather not have an argument than have an argument. I would rather not confront something rather than confront something. That's just the way I am, especially with Julie. But that makes it, I think, makes it difficult to deal with those arguments that don't come neatly out of the box. And I think frequent arguing gives you the ability to practice resolution if it's done properly. And frequent withholding from an argument doesn't get you to that point where you're pushed or challenged to address things that are sometimes difficult to address.
So what we've noticed, we've been together 23 years, and we've noticed this developmental pattern a relationship takes, especially around how close you get or how much distance there is. Obviously, when your kids are little, it's very logistical. You're doing so many things that it's hard to really feed the relationship. And then, and I think we develop as people, like our, 30-year-old brain is very different than our 50-year-old brain. And that conflict that you guys are talking about, at least for us, that is the thing that drives our connection and our security when we get through those conflicts in the relationship and allows us to be closer. Can you guys share about that long journey for you and how things were in the beginning and in any of the stages you noticed along the way?
One of the words you just used then, Jean, is our core, which is that word connection. The connection that we have now at this point in our marriage, I think, is far deeper and richer than what it was earlier on in the marriage. And I think that connection that we have of really understanding each other and knowing where each other are at comes predominantly through trial and error over the different stages of our marriage and our relationship and how we interact with each other. It's like something that just grows over time and just changes and it shapes itself over time. And trust as well, the trust, creating that space. In the early years of our marriage, we were learning about what that feels like and having those hard conversations. And what we have now in those spaces is the confidence and the trust that I can share anything with Ari and he can share that with me and we'll be okay through that no matter what the content is, because we keep consistently affirming one another in that way. And so we're able to literally, we don't argue that lot because we focus on that connection and talking and sharing and all that sort of thing. And with 3 kids underfoot and all that sort of thing, and things were, I wouldn't use the word volatile, but pretty chaotic in terms of day-to-day management of the house and fatigue and all those sorts of things. And so, again, it comes back to some boundaries and parameters. We try not to take things out on each other when we're, really tired and all that sort of stuff, and hold each other to account too. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that piece around connection and trust has been what's evolved through the years, yeah.
So there has been a transition, and it hasn't always felt comfortable or been easy. So when we first started, the first 7 years, say, or 10 years, where we were then in life and as people and as a couple and where we are now, most of that has remained the same. The core of who we are, of what brought us together, has remained the same. But there has been a transition. I haven't thought about it because no one's ever asked me. So to put it into some type of what does it mean? What is it? We've been challenged by life to remain united regardless of the circumstances that we face, regardless of the challenges or the things that we have or we don't have. And it's a commitment to each other to see the good in each other and to see the better in each other and to extend that and develop that bond of human love with another person that it's that desire that has helped us to transition. It's not something that's really built on a role model at the end of the day. It's not something that's really built on how we've been counselled. It's just that desire to make this what it can be, to make it healthy and to make it wholesome, and to always not give up hope of it being even better one day. So that's the best way I could sum it up.
Which means that takes a lot of intentional things. A lot of intention is behind that. It means that we're careful to not take for granted who we are in our relationship and what we have. And so, yeah, we're just really intentional about nurturing that and strengthening that.
There's things I still try, and even though I don't mean to do it, but looking back, because you're asking about relationship concerns and matters, I still try and get Julie to be and do what I want her to do, even though it's not bad, like things that I'm comfortable with that I would like her to do. And I'm not sure if that's the same with Julie, but that's like if I want her to make me breakfast in the morning, every morning, whatever. I'm not saying that's the case, but just say.
It's not the case.
just say, or having the house clean, or, whatever it is.
Sometimes that's the case.
It's something that I guide, and I literally role model that myself. If I want Julie to keep a clean house, I'll keep the house clean, and that's my way of showing her this is the way I want to live, or the behaviour, or this is the way I like.
That's a good point. We role model to each other what we want in our relationship.
But you don't always get what you want. And it's learning to live with that and communicate that. I mean, and people will change their communication styles over time as well. So,
yeah, that reminds me of something that Gandhi said. He said that be the change that you want to see in the world. And we often tell our couples, be the change that you want to see in your relationship.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
We went through a pretty intense time. I don't know if we're done with our intense time around hormonal changes, right? So when I hit about 49, it seemed like an intensity really turned on in terms of my sensitivity and my emotions and the way I was wanting to actually shift in how I was living my life. And I think you've gone through a few periods as well as in aging to it's sort of like a transitional process is just kind of put on you. It's not something you seek. It's just there. Have you guys been affected by that at all?
I'd have to say, Jean, no, not yet. Not if you count buying a new motorbike as part of that process, which we're in the middle of. So if that's our transition, then we're really blessed because it's a good one and we're looking forward to it. In terms of navigating the type of experience you've just explained, that hasn't happened to us in that way.
But we have had some serious, whether it was hormonal or due to external causes, we have had serious personal issues to deal with. Maybe hormones were part of it, but when I left the military, I was in a very awkward state between living in a world in an environment of threat and then trying to live in a society where I could see those same threats emanating everywhere. And so for me, it was more of a mental health journey than hormonal, and it was extremely difficult for me. It's something I've never experienced before. I would lie in bed. As soon as I would wake up, my heart would just be pounding out of my chest for no reason. And I would be literally scared to get out of bed. And having to be a father and a husband in that at the same time as living in fear is one of the most horrible. It was the worst 6 years of my life, worst time ever. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And it took years for me to be able to experience a day without experiencing fear. I used to live, in the worst case, it was just moment to moment. It was, I really didn't know what was going to happen to me based on the next breath. All I had was the next breath. And I thought to myself, if I can keep breathing one more time, I'll be okay. And it was just that constant struggle against fear and anxiety. And that was difficult on Julie. It was difficult on the children. It was difficult on me to keep it all together as well.
What were some things that were helpful for you during that time that Julie might have done?
Definitely listening. Definitely. I needed her to reflect reality to me. Like, this is what I'm thinking. This is my conclusion. What do you think about my conclusion? Is it rational? Is it logical? Or am I just flipping out here? And the most difficult time is when my reality didn't match the reality that Julie had. Whether which one of us was right or wrong at the time, it still was one of those interesting areas that I had to navigate. But yeah, definitely being that person who I could rely and confide in without judging me. Because there's a lot of things that I had to be honest with Julie about, things that I couldn't tell anybody else. And I owed it to her for me to be honest, to share my experience with her as well. And at the same time, she had to be strong enough to be able to support me and support the things that I was, not support the things I was telling her, but deal with that and carry that, and just being aware of those things to be able to shoulder the burden of being a listener. It's not an easy thing. That literally took years to transition through that.
I think this is a very important piece here, that there isn't enough attention paid to it. You know, we've done several episodes with combat veterans, and I talk about that transition back to civilian life and how, you know, their experiences, the things that they saw and did, changed their perspective on everything for good. And so, you know, it affects their relationships, you know, especially with a partner, you know, a committed partner. And, you know, it's something that really is not attended to enough. And I think that there is a lot of attention being paid to PTSD now, but how PTSD is affecting a couple and the relationship and the family as a whole, you know, it's very extensive.
Yeah. And the tools that are needed to navigate through that are critical. And it's one of those things that, you know, sure, there's lots of, you know, self-help things and books and guides and stuff out there. But when you're in that moment, scrambling to know how to process what you're in the middle of and not getting lost in this feeling of feeling overwhelmed with it, that's the challenge, and that's what we worked through.
So my assessment of how we've changed over the past, the latter stages of my life, something I've learned about Julie is she is very, very strong. She's a very strong woman. She comes across as being a pleaser and wanting people to be comfortable and things like that. But if she needs to be, she will carry the load and carry the heaviest part of the load as well. And that is just full credit to her. The things that I've had to allow her to carry on my behalf it's just amazing.
You know, that's exactly kind of what I was talking about. And, you know, our belief is that the person who can help us heal the most is our partner. They're also the person who can hurt us the most. And so that's what we teach couples in the work that we do. And, you know, I think, Ari, you and I share more of a similar story in terms of what we needed to heal and share with another human being that, you know, we had to do in secret before, the wounds were secret before. And, you know, I would say the same thing, that you were really able to manage me during, you know, when that stuff comes out, it doesn't come out pretty, right? And I think that is the beauty of being in such a long-term relationship that you can really get to that depth and have a safe enough environment and connection that you can trust someone like that. And it's beautiful. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. And while you were talking, Gina, I feel like I've got a better just articulation of that transition. So, for example, earlier in the day, if he were to share, or just in our interaction, be a particular way, the way that I would internalize it would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's feeling that way. And why is he doing it? And da-da-da. And there's all this, taking it personally versus to where I am now. I'm hearing something, but what I'm asking myself is, gee, that's interesting. What's going on behind that to cause that particular expression or conversation or behavior or whatever? And it turns into a curiosity. I don't take it personally that it's an attack against me because I trust him enough that I know it's not, if that makes sense. Whereas earlier in the day, I would have been like, oh my gosh, and just freaking out about it. So,
yeah, we call that an iceberg. So, the way our brains are designed, like 85% of our brains are subconscious. They're automatic. And that's, that part of our brain never degrades. It never forgets, it just sort of stays there. And then the 15%, that's happening now that we're really conscious of, so something happens in the now, but it brings up 100% of that emotion.
Yeah.
And so, that's, you guys are totally describing the melting of the iceberg and how a couple can heal by sharing like that. That's really awesome.
One thing that we're seeing is that, at least here in the United States, a lot of couples aren't getting that opportunity to go to that depth of understanding in a relationship. I mean, our divorce rate here is 48%. And so, almost half, people are starting over. And so when you start over in a relationship, you don't get to those later stages, and leaning into the pain and leaning into the emotional struggle, because that's really where you learn, right? Yeah. That's where you learn the depth of your partner and they learn the depth of you. And, you get to that higher stages, higher levels in a relationship. I don't know if it's the same in, in Australian culture as far as divorce and, in marriage.
It's not pretty.
It's very similar. I think it's around 52%. But that has been decreasing over the past decade.
It's just one of the, you got to have that willingness to go into those places in the conversations. And the thing is, Jean and Ray, is that nobody teaches us how to do that. So you have to be so on purpose in your relationship to pursue an understanding in that and be willing to learn the tools to help achieve that and experiment and just work through it and figure it out. That's really important for us.
What I've seen is that the whole idea of family has been reinvented quite a few times over the past 20 years. In fact, the whole idea of relationships have changed considerably over the past 30 years. The traditional ideas of family and the roles that family played has really made a huge impact on society. Before, where you had families that could trace their lineage back for hundreds of years, and relationships and responsibilities and roles didn't change during that period of time, whether it was profession or domestic, whether the roles were domestic. Those types of that framework isn't anywhere near prevalent as what it used to be. Mm-hmm. And the supports that used to provide is no longer there. And as a result, people are more lonely than ever. They're less connected than ever. They're less supported than ever before, even though we have more support services now than I think we've ever had in the history of humanity. It's that organic relationship that is really that interpersonal relationship that is not either to the same degree or in quality or volume today than it used to be. My mates are getting married and they don't have that support. I just wonder, they are, and I'm not saying they're doomed to failure. I'm not at all. But the challenges that they're going to face and that they're going to have to overcome don't have the benefit of that
network.
That network, the support structures that traditional families used to provide.
Community.
Community. I just wonder how that's going to look. Facebook and Twitter won't do it for you.
What you guys are describing is exactly why we do this podcast.
Yeah.
So people can learn it, right?
Yeah.
So I just wonder how they're going to overcome the challenges. The hurdles will be there, absolutely. Hollywood won't teach them.
Teach them all the wrong things.
Yeah.
We'll have to come there to a weekend.
I'm just amazed at how well they do, given the circumstances. So I'm fortunate enough to have worked with some really good people. They're from a wide variety of backgrounds. They're young, like 20, 30 years younger than me, so I feel I'm with the young crowd. But they're starting off on their own. One guy has twin girls. They're 4 years of age. Another guy, he's already got one son, and they're having another child. They're having a daughter now. So they're very young, and we don't tend to talk a lot about family. We don't tend to talk about what's happening in our personal lives. We spend a lot of time either at work or socialising down the pub, and we don't talk about problems.
The hard stuff.
Yeah, we don't. It just doesn't come up. We talk about work. We don't talk about politics anymore.
Right.
We don't talk about sport because there is none because of isolation, but we do talk about work. So I wonder, what's happening in our private lives? How do we? It's just like we're becoming more and more, I don't know.
Isolated?
I don't know. It's just one of the
yeah, 100%.
But that desire is still there, and people will still need support in that area.
You're right that the family structure has been redefined. In the United States, the leading family structure is the blended family. And so there is no actual rule book, or standard on how to have a healthy blended family. And so everyone, and the dismantling of the community has affected it as well. We're seeing a lot of people in the millennial generation not getting married because they don't want to repeat the mistakes of the prior generation and get a divorce. And so there's a lot more cohabitation that is occurring. But that isolation is absolutely happening. And people are finding themselves delving into social media, but it is a kind of a shield or a mask from reality.
Yeah.
So there isn't any depth in connection, with other human beings.
Yeah. And how to build that, how to foster that, how to create that connection and add to it.
So where do you see the future, at least in the West, in terms of family structure and community? How do you see that changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think that this whole isolation that has happened because of the virus has given us all an opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. It has given us an opportunity to really look at what is truly important in our lives, and that is family, and that is connection, that is relationships. And because we've been forced to be disconnected, it has really put a spotlight on needing to enrich those relationships that we have in our lives.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is an opportunity. I don't know if we will all take it, but it is there for all of us.
Yeah. We're noticing too, our son is 21 and he has a strong desire to be in a committed relationship. And he is currently in a really wonderful relationship, but he had to seemed kind of odd because he really wasn't the kind of guy that was going on social media or dating through apps or things like that. And they met in person, and she's a wonderful person. And I think I think that generation is going to be the one that starts to push away from the virtual stuff and start connecting more. At least I hope so.
Yeah, I had a sense about that as well, that we're going to go full circle here.
Hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So last question. What is it that your partner does that you know they love you?
I thought you might ask that question. I'll pick off while Ari thinks that through. The stuff that I see every single day, the small things that he does that shows me that he loves me. I pull up in the driveway with a car full of groceries and it's raining. He comes out with an umbrella, holds the umbrella over my head while I'm hopping out of the car, sends me inside, and he brings it all in. That says, I love you, I care about you. It's those small gestures that just mean the world to me. And I have a collection of mementos and things like that. When he was out in the army and out in the bush training, he had a moment where he had some time to himself and leaning against a tree, and the bark on the tree was very, very thin like paper. So he peeled some off and wrote a little poem to me, put it in an envelope and sent it, and I still have it. It's almost translucent because it's aged, but that is just so beautiful. And when times just recently when I had a really hard day at work and I was upset about a situation, and he knew that I was upset, and he just gave me his full attention. And it's so powerful when you experience what it's like to be deeply listened to and heard. And he didn't jump into, well, let me fix that for you, I suggest you do da-da. He just listened. And later that day came home with a beautiful little pot with some flowers in it to brighten my day. It's the thoughtfulness, regularly putting me first to himself. That just means the world to me. So I could go on, but we don't have the amount of time that I would fill.
So I try and be the strong person in this relationship. Try. Julie shows that she loves me because she's able to carry me when I'm weak. And she does it out of love. She honours me. She doesn't put me to shame. And she respects me.
That is so beautiful, guys. It's really wonderful hearing this.
Thank you.
It is really wonderful to meet you both. Julie and Ari, thank you so much for being on our podcast today. This has been wonderful for us and for our listeners as well.
You are welcome.
You're welcome, guys.
All the best with the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Human beings have been sharing stories since the beginning of time to bond, to heal, and to grow. And we hope that by you guys sharing your story, it's enriched your lives and the lives of our listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to wholeheartedly thank you all for listening and joining us on Couple Synergy today. Our passion is in helping couples and people have happy and healthy relationships. And this podcast gives us a fun way of bringing our knowledge and expertise to you, our listeners. For all of you listening, please subscribe to our podcast and please leave us a review. If you have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions, please email us at contact@couplesynergy.com. For more information about Couple Synergy and our programs such as Relationship 101, the Couples Weekend Intensive, and our premier program called Couple to Couple, look us up online at couplesynergy.com.
And if you know someone who could benefit from this episode, please download it and share it. And thank you for listening.
Until next time, synergize your life and synergize your love.
You have been listening to Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean Kedkodian. Couple Synergy was recorded, edited, and produced by Dr. Ray and Jean Kedkodian. Voiceover and music entitled Breathe and Let Go was recorded and composed by Gina Gonzalez.